Hello, Jill. Welcome.
Hello.
Okay.
We are stuck in the technology, and we try to figure out how to make it possible to have a Becky, if I correctly understand from in the conversation. But there is something
Okay.
not working
Okay.
with the link.
I think I've found the link and I'm just sending it to her, please.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see if we can get it on. Okay.
Jill, we are in a big.
We got Giles. We don't have Becky, but we've got Giles. Okay, we're having a lot of issues with technology. We still haven't learned, after all COVIDs and all of this, we still haven't learned the right of Teams. We have one of the students that needs to present that seems that the link is not working for her. So anyway.
Yeah, and we are in a strange position because we are in a big event, and they assign us a very, very big classroom, but with the, as you can see, with the stage and all the seats on the opposite way, so we can't make possible to see you, the students, so we change position, and now we are working with my laptop, and so I hope that everything will be fine the same. So sorry, but we are not in the normal situation here at the university. We are hosting all the municipality and all the city is here for a big event, and so there is more confusion than usual. Rome is a mess if you ever been here, but today is more confused than usual.
Okay, I would say while we wait for Becky, maybe we make it a start because otherwise we will never finish. I think maybe Will step up and present. Will?
Yeah.
Well, we'll let Cal and Luke go first if they're presenting.
Okay, we will let them present first if they're presenting too. So, but maybe you can give it a start, Mauro, and then.
Okay, we start. Okay. Thank you very much to all of you. I'm Mauro Baioni. I'm a teacher of urban planning here, and I'm also a researcher. And I'm very, very happy to have this conversation with you. I think that will be proficient for our students, of course, and I hope also for you. Here in Rome, actually, we are looking at the city as if the city is the entire world, but because it's not, and the world is so different, I hope that they will be surprised to see what's happening in Melbourne and in Australia and how different cities can manage the same model and the same concept. So let me present my students. They are at the third year, so the last year of the first part of the first period of their graduation, and this is the first or the second classroom in urban planning. They had, so they are not urban planners. They are trying to become some of them in the future.
They're not planners yet.
Yeah, they are not planners yet, but some of them I'm sure they will be. So Stefano, I give you the word. We made a small exercise in the last few weeks in the outskirts of Rome. We choose a very, very, very significant location, and Stefano will present why it's so significant, also in the terms of the 50-minute city. Oh, let me share the screen. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Stefano, the word's on you.
Good afternoon, I'm Stefano, and I'm one of the students from the third year of architecture that collaborated for the exercise of the city of 15 minutes. The theme of the exercise, as I just mentioned, is the city of 15 minutes. We looked at this model to see how it's made and how it can be used in enhanced proximity. The goal of this exercise is to define the services that a well-managed city should offer in order to satisfy the needs of citizens, especially the most fragile ones. The interest of this type of model and exercise comes from the observation of the city where we live in, Rome. Living in such a chaotic and big city makes us automatically think about what could we do in order to improve the connection with services and the quality of neighborhood life. Our attention went to one of the most problematic suburbs of Rome, Ponte di Nona. It's located in the east of Rome, just outside of the Raccordo, the highway ring that surrounds the capital. Ponte di Nona can be described as a cluster of neighborhoods, very close to each other, but that hardly communicate among them, where about 30,000 people live in. As shown in the schemes of the average incomes in the city, the richness varies drastically between the center and the suburbs. It is true, indeed, that when someone who's not from Rome thinks about it and its characteristic, there's always the idea of this eternal city, the beautiful monuments and classical neighborhoods. But it's not always like this. Indeed, the east part is the most problematic and disadvantaged. The recent construction of the suburbs in Ponte di Nona, as well as in all of the suburbs of the capital, has the peculiarity of assuming a patchwork look. The non-homogeneous look is given by the presence of different kinds of residential settlements, big malls, infrastructures, and patches of countryside. It's not just a small neighborhood, but blocks of land with different functions and looks. Continue. The development of Ponte di Nona started since the 70s. The first two quarters that has been constructed are Colle del Sole and Villaggio Falcone. Later, in the early 2000s, the other two quarters have been constructed, with them the more Roma Est on top. The construction of the quarters is still active. Part of this construction are authorized. Some of them are public or social housing, and some are unauthorized, constructed without building laws. The organization of the small quarters inside the suburb, geographically, makes think of 4 different cities of 15 minutes, with 4 apparent organization of each quarter. In reality, these 4 neighborhoods have major issues with services, access with the nearby neighborhoods, and the connection with the city by public transport. We wanted to analyze how Ponte di Nona could work as a 15-minute city to encourage proximity relationships. For the in-depth study of the 2 topics that we identified, we used the tools of social media analysis, in-person site inspection for a more technical aspect, we consulted existing documents, project, and interviews. The last one too has been for us one of the most interesting. We interviewed designers of the area, the town hall councilor president, and the head of the library, Casale Rosso. After applying those tools, we identified these 2 main themes: the broken city and the culture in the neighborhood. We intervene in a city that is partly broken, partly unfinished. The words fixing and completing does not mean restoring initial functionality, but rather rethinking places, introducing an imaginary, offering different opportunities to residents, etc. Therefore, was make a thoughtful mapping of places that need changing operation. The broken places that we identified are the bicycle path, the underpass, and the park. Ponte di Nona is a young neighborhood. Today, it is a living space for many children and young people up to 16 to 18 years old. The 15-minute city is important because it offers opportunities for children and teenagers to meet at school, sports, aggregation, points of culture, for creativity, arts, reading, etc. Even in the disorganization of the site, there are structures that involve the youth, such the library Casale Rosso and sports campus. The Library Casale Rosso was founded in 2006 after years of battle to find a site for the association named Papillon that used to help the ex-convicts of Rebibbia prison to be reintroduced into the world of work. The association was active thanks to public funding, which was suspended in 2008, resulting to the discontinuation of this service. The library is now active again thanks to the work to Vittorio Antonini. In addition to the simple function of the library, a full schedule of activities is offered to meet the needs not only of children, but of the neighborhood itself. This thing is as beautiful as fragile, because the whole thing is administered by only one person, Vittorio.
Okay.
Administration is not yet present. In fact, 15 projects has been awarded to 15 neighborhoods of the capital city, and Ponte di Nona is one of them. The master plan involves realization of cycle and pedestrian paths that runs north to south, connecting the all neighborhoods. Concentration of activities along the path, services, residential, and recreational, to create a special connection and an area for new relationship to thrive, and punctual building projects along the route are included as stopping places, such as pocket gardens, boulevards, and urban parks. The project also involves a bridge that connects two sides of the streets along the cycle and pedestrian path. Incorporate the surrounding green and use areas in a logic of proximity. The realization of this project would increase value of this area, equipping each one of outdoor services to promote an interest and incentivize local maintenance. Sorry.
A little pause. Okay.
The project requested by the administration has specific criteria. During this analysis, however, we realized that there is a need to respond to the problematic described above, not only through a proper technical project. The expectation of people who will take care of the places, their imagination, the habits of local residents are to be carefully considered, and the project should be open enough to be implemented and adapted over the time. This is why the 15-minute city model should not be considered mechanically, but rather interested in interpreted. Sorry. We noticed that all of the different dimensions are never present. Some of them doesn't work. Some others need to be reinforced. Also, the circle does not suit our area of analysis because there is not a center. Rather, we figure it is a path along which there are places where where many things can happen. The task is to understand the potential of this place and act on the possibilities that the structure of the neighborhood offer us. I'll show you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano. Let me go back. Okay. Francesca and other colleagues, could you
hear
something about what we show and what we said on Ponte di Nona? Was it sufficiently clear for you that don't know Rome as well as we do?
I do.
You do.
A bit. I do. I grew up in that part of Rome, so I kind of know. A lot of that stuff wasn't there when I grew up there. So especially the green part, the very last development wasn't there. But I've been to the shopping center, so I do know that.
And the majority of people, it's so big. Everyone is going to Roma Est.
Just to do. I did some shopping when I came for Christmas. I went to Roma Est to do some shopping. No, it's interesting. It's interesting that your conclusion was along the path, because also your project is along a path, because both in the case of the project that Will with his group Becky maybe can join us, and Luke and Cal with the group worked. They actually arrived at an intervention. So I give a bit of background for the students in Rome. What we've done this semester, so the students are online here from Australia, Perth. I worked this semester on a project in Melbourne as part of the semester. And in this project, which was part of the C40 competition, there's actually a site in Rome if you want to participate to that competition as well. Is a suburban context, and Melbourne has a specific policy, which is, I would say, an adaptation of the 50-minute city, which is called the 20 minutes neighborhood. We have actually talked to Melbourne, but they said that it's not true, that it's not a 50-minute city, it's a 20 minutes neighborhood. The principles are very, very similar, but they were very keen to let us know that was a 20 minutes neighborhood, not a 50-minute city. And so the students in our class, which is called Urban Regeneration, have actually worked in developing an intervention in a suburban context in Australia. So given that both projects have these elements of the path, I thought that maybe it's good. I don't know what Luke and Will would say. Becky seems that she can't connect. She gets the same message. I've shared all sorts of link with her. Maybe you both present what you came up with, and maybe we have a conversation about moving from that centralized model to maybe a horizontal fragmented model that seems to be working in different contexts. What do you think?
Sure.
Yes.
We'll share our screen in a moment. We just need some access to share our screen.
Yes.
If someone give us access.
Yeah,
please.
because Mauro, they only attendees, so they need to be presenters. So Will is a presenter, but not Luke and Kel. So they need to be presenters to be able to share the screen.
We try. I'm going there.
There we go. We got it.
Yes, you're our presenter now. This my camera, so you don't need to see me. So they're sharing the screen.
Wonderful.
And yes.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. That's perfect.
Yeah, perfect.
Let me share our video as well.
Oh, wait 1 second. I'll just share our video as well. Okay. Cancel that. Okay.
Are we live? You can hear us?
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent.
It's all yours.
Slash, can you see us? We can't see you, so.
No, we can't
no,
see you.
Normal. If you share the screen, it's quite hard to see us. So go on easily. There's no problem.
Okay, no problem. I'm Cale McGression, and I'm here with Luke Misford, and we're going to present to you our idea for an urban regeneration strategy in Thomastown in Melbourne, Victoria. Before we get started, a little bit of context around Australian suburbia and the Melbourne suburban setting. It's important to understand that Australian cities generally were a lot less dense. Melbourne is one of our most dense cities and one of our most cosmopolitan, and yet it's little under a quarter of the density that you would experience in Rome. It's roughly 500 people per kilometre squared, rather than just over 2,000 people per kilometre squared. And this is mostly due to our development through the 60s and 70s in a very car-centric manner. What that resulted in was street layouts like you see here with the warped parallel and loops and lollipops, as they're called here, which necessitated the use of cars over walkable access. And that's present in our site, which we've just got up now. If you look towards the eastern side of this site, of this map, you'll see these loops and lollipops and how they sort of carve up the suburban setting. So the Australian suburban setting, much more distributed, much further from the city centre, and typically a lot less dense, larger lots. We're talking about a quarter-acre block with typically single detached dwellings, mostly one story. And these sort of suburban environments can be problematic and are typically unequipped to deal with current trends, namely increased urban to suburban migration that we're experiencing in Australia at the moment due to our housing crisis, a need for housing typographies which have a diverse mix that cater to a diverse range of different people with different kinds of needs. And of course, as mentioned with the street layout that we typically have in these middle, older suburbs, is sustainable access and connectivity. So this has kind of required a change in understanding of the 15-minute city to what Melbourne has developed is the 20-minute city. And Luke will just explain that now to you.
So the 20-minute neighbourhood is a Victorian state government initiative. It's adapted the 20-minute neighbourhoods or the 15-minute city idea to their local context. So they developed 6 hallmarks. So the first hallmark focuses on active transport and mobility, enabling access without needing a car. The second hallmark is ensuring that the quality of the public environment is actually decent enough to facilitate a nice walking environment and encourage people to walk and use public amenities around. The third hallmark is public services, and that's basically to ensure that you don't need to drive out to the grocery store or drive to get to a doctor's appointment or anything like that. The fourth hallmark is access to public transport. This is more necessary for access to major employment centres or shopping centres, and this is the idea for that. The fifth hallmark is ensuring that the building typologies and densities ensure that these local services and transport options are now viable economically. And the sixth hallmark is ensuring that the local area is vibrant and active. So this brought us to our vision, sorry, and we thought Thomastown is a precinct rich with existing services and opportunities. However, it lacks integration and is thus underutilized. This was our idea for the basis of urban regeneration. And our vision for Thomastown is to integrate existing green space infrastructure with active transport networks to create a safe, connected and accessible landscape of services, employment and living opportunities. So a residential development model which interfaces properly with the existing public realm is essential in the regeneration of Thomastown and will aim to increase the volume and diversity of housing structures, whilst also being sensitive to maintaining the sense of place and encouraging vibrancy. So this is our master plan map with the 20 minutes neighbourhood applied through it. As you can see in the blue circle over here, this is our area which we identified that was in the 800 metres catchment of both the train station to the west, or to the east, sorry, and the commercial centre in the east over here. This is important because 800 metres is the 10-minute catchment there, required walking distance to get to a place there and back. And this forms the basis of the 20-minute neighbourhoods.
So foundationary to any sort of 20-minute neighbourhood intervention is a strong active transport network. And we've based ours off a hierarchy of paths with 2 primary paths travelling north to south and east to west. You can see they intersect there in the middle in our what was our targeted community hub. And each of these paths is connected to the wider urban environment through a combination of secondary and tertiary paths, which are less intense, but equally as meaningful. We've also tried to integrate our path choices and where we've oriented these paths with existing and proposed green infrastructure. You see Edgar Creek running down the center of the site there. That's an incredibly valuable natural amenity, and we sought to leverage that as a regional active transport connection.
And in terms of environment and sustainability and public open realm, prior to our master plan vision, the actual public open space was very similar to each other. It was all just active lawn space. This may be good, but however, there was a lack of biodiversity, and there really was a need for a variety of green spaces. And this is important, especially in Australia, because in summers we can get temperatures up to 40 degrees Celsius, and having shade is kind of necessary to prevent heat stroke or health conditions as well.
It essentially creates a situation where public open space becomes more accessible to more people and usable in a more diverse manner when you have a more diverse provision of natural amenity. Finally, these are some proposed cross sections for the 3 housing typologies that we were proposing across the site. In your upper left here, you have a smaller cottage style typography where we were using a design coding intervention, essentially guidelines which mandate certain outcomes from the built form in order to create a strong interface between private residential uses and the public realm, in this case, primary pathway, which was from our active transport hierarchy. These features include veranda spaces, elevated buildings to create a sense of ownership over the space in order to create that territoriality, which can make these spaces safe and comfortable for users. On the top right, we have a larger typography, which would have been more targeted at family households and the like, where we sought to turn the public open space that they back onto into a sort of pseudo backyard, integrating the two uses together. And finally, the bottom here is a proposal for a mixed use development that was on the far east side of the site, which sought to have co-location of young couples and professionals with commercial uses and opportunities for employment and consumption. That's about it.
Yeah, that's about it. Yeah, cool. Any questions at all? We're happy to answer any.
Thank you.
Got a bit of echo. Do we want to ask question and have a conversation now? I can see Will that Becky still can't make it. So
Yeah.
if you want to go ahead. So we can do the other presentation and having a bit of discussion at the end, or do we, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, it feels like Becky's probably not going to be able to make it now.
No,
but she does
I've
send her
tried,
apologies.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
she's tried everything. She's like,
I
tried
know,
3
I've sent her
different
all
devices.
sorts of links. I don't know.
She does apologize though.
That's
So,
okay. No, it's not a fault. Sometimes technology just doesn't work. That's fault.
Yeah.
that's the case.
Do you feel like showing what you have done?
Yeah, I can
Kind
do
of,
that. I mean, Luke and Kale did a great job at sort of discussing the context of the site and sort of the challenge.
So
with the
you
Melbourne
can
context.
you can just present how you responded differently to the same
Yeah,
context. Yeah.
Yep.
Um,
Fair enough. Okay, so just let me bring up the presentation. Present.
Un'altra presentazione, no? Sempre loro dello stesso posto, un altro esercizio. Loro ne hanno fatti 2. Sì.
Noi abbiamo 8 gruppi. Questi erano solo 2 degli 8 gruppi.
Right. Does this show for
Yeah, we
everyone?
can. Yes, it does.
Lovely. Okay. I'm Will. Hello, everyone. We're from Perth, by the way, which is the complete opposite side of the country for Melbourne, which means that we're sort of in a similar basket as you guys are, in that we can't actually usually visit the site like we'd want to. I think only maybe one of us in the entire course was able to visit the site because they were actually watching the Formula One at that time. So anyway, so Becky, she sends her apologies for not being able to come. So yeah, let's sort of start with our master plan. So this is Thomastown, and it's actually quite peripheral. It's I think it's about 20 k's away from the central business district, which means that if you really want to get to the city quickly, to do so, you'll need to go by the suburban train system. It's located in Victoria, 14 kilometres north of the CBD. And the site has 2 schools, a primary school and a high school, as well as a community centre, and then a shopping centre, and then relatively here there would be a train station. So this is our analysis of the site, and there's actually a lot of benefit to doing an intervention on this site along the lines of the 20-minute city. Given that there is such a abundance of sort of public services, we felt that the site presented a lot of opportunity to really consolidate and to build on those services. If we were to choose this site that was more peripheral and less central, we'd have a tougher time in justifying an increase in density and spending all that effort in what is essentially a low density suburban setting. Yeah, our vision for our project was the Thomastown project aims to harness environmental and social infrastructure as the drivers for positive change, creating a model for 20-minute lifestyles within existing communities. Future development will focus on the social, environmental and economic needs of the local community, creating a greater access for pedestrians and leveraging on existing assets to transform local character and purpose. So that was sort of our wishy-washy take on the whole concept and how it sort of relates to our site specifically. This is just some site analysis. I'll skip over this. So we had sort of 5 different themes for the site. So vibrant centres, connected places, enhanced character, greener spaces, and a shared local culture. One thing that is sort of unique to Australia is our sort of colonial heritage, and before that, our Indigenous heritage. And that is something that our society as a whole is getting a real handle on at the moment, where we've got some constitutional changes coming up. Hopefully those go through. But it's really where we're sort of discovering our past and trying to reconcile what is a tricky sort of history. And really move forward to strengthen our nation. That's sort of a different sort of thing than maybe a lot of European countries where I'm just gonna make assumptions. Anyway, so that's something to keep in note for our Australian context. This is our master plan, or at least sort of what appears to be a compressed blocky version of it. So essentially what this includes is a central spine almost of pedestrian and cycle path going through, and this will connect the eastern side of the site with the western side. So on this western side, we have a small little shopping centre, community scale, and another school, a private school. And then on the eastern side, we have the train station is up at this end. Now, our design essentially tries to pull people away from what is a very congested and tricky little small narrow street that has the unenviable task of taking pedestrian, cycle, public transport, buses, as well as the full car volume of 2 schools and a community centre all throughout a corridor that's only about 15 metres wide. So our plan attempts to sort of detangle this site by bringing the school, which would previously be located here on this main street, which is what it's called, and pulling it to the top of the site here. We'd also like to separate the cycle infrastructure so that could go unimpeded throughout the site and have sort of a clear right of way all the way through, away and separate from traffic, to sort of allow a greater level of confidence for people who, kids might be riding to primary school, or less confident adults trying to corral kids might be taking them to school and dropping them off and that sort of thing. So we would really like to detangle that. This is sort of our themes. So we've got our connected places, greener spaces, vibrant centres, and enhanced character. Various different implementation options. Yeah, these are the strategies. So the way ours sort of differed from, I'm going to assume most of the different projects, was that we sort of decided to take a greater level of intervention in terms of placing a sort of central road through, but more importantly the bike path, and having sort of an integrated level of land use that sort of tied into the surrounding infrastructure and sort of brought people into the site rather than sort of them keeping away in the first place. So yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably a brief overview. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Will. Can I ask a question to the Italian students?
Of
How
course you
aware
can.
actually of the context of Australian cities and how they actually work? Do they understand it? Do they have an understanding?
No, they didn't hear you well, Francesca. Can you repeat?
Can you hear me now?
Now, okay. Yes or no?
Can you hear me?
There's an ambulance.
Yes or no?
Okay.
Can you hear me
Now?
now? I'm in
Okay.
the same spot as before.
Okay.
I asked if because both Will and Luke and Kel gave a little bit of background to the context of their project, but I was just asking to the Italian students if they have experienced it or they understand that concept of the suburbia and what suburbia, like deep suburbia, means. So just to better contextualize even the conversation. Do they, Mauro? Do you?
Yeah.
Have you
I got the point.
experienced it?
No, actually, I've never been in.
US
okay,
would be similar, even if you've been in the US, would be.
Yeah,
somehow.
I've been there sometimes, but actually, I had just a fast glance of what means living in the suburbia. Actually, we see suburbia every day because of TV series and movies.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
we are quite familiar with that environment. Through the screen.
Yeah.
But of course,
Yeah.
as you well know, living is not seeing a TV show. So
We study we are studying in a lesson, right? How work the suburban like that, right? And to the morning, the people go to the work in the city, in the center of city, and the night come back to home, right? And the city have this problem or similar. It's too many people go to the center and come back to the home for all day and all time. We in Rome now it's like because too many people go to living outside of the Raccordo Anulare in this time, but the central city is altre persone continuano a vivere dentro Roma, non mi viene il other people still live in Rome, but we go to this suburban
right? The Roman people go to the suburban because it's more cheap.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So it is true, it is not true at the same time, in the sense that the model that we and Will and you and Cal, that would be the next generation of planners taking care of Australian cities, had to deal with. It's a model that, yes, was based on this central, that is the city, which is where you get your skyscrapers, where you get, your high density building where people go to work, and suburbia where people go to sleep. In time, this has evolved. It's still quite present, but it is more fragmented. That's kind of real two sides of the story. And so now the next step is, there are things that are actually happening in suburbia. So suburbia is catching up in the sense there is job opportunities. You don't just go in this suburban location just to sleep, but it's a question of densities and model of living. So these suburban are based on a model of living of individual dwelling of a quarter of a block acre. So it's a big block of land with a big house that it's called 3x2, 3 bedroom and 3 bathroom. That's what it stands for. So that's how a real estate agent would talk to you, a 3x2. So it means that you've got 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. But it's not a sustainable model of living in terms of housing, because the population will eventually increase again when we open the borders. So it's a very low density model. So it's very hard to drive an economy around a very, very low dense model of living. So that's the issues, is, which Will, Luke, Kel, and all their generation will have the hard task to push forward in another direction. And so models like the 15 minutes, 20 minutes, as you've seen also in Rome, don't just, you can't just take them and dump them in that context. They assume some sort of different forms of shape. But I've thought it was interesting that in both cases, in your presentation, Mauro, Stefano, and the presentation that Stefano did, but also there's this model of actually trying to connect things. So it's kind of spread along little bits happening along some sort of line of linking bits together. Maybe the 15-minute city needs to change name. I don't know. It's the linking city instead of the 15-minute cities. I don't know. Maybe it's a linking city. I don't know. What do you think? What was the impression? I would like to know from both Will and Luke and Cal, what is the impression of what they've seen from what Stefano has presented from Rome, and likewise from your students, Mauro, in Rome, Stefano, and the others. Sorry, Stefano, just telling your name because you're the only one you presented, so it's the only name that I know. But what is your kind of, I don't know, what is your lesson that you bring home from, what you've seen that the your Australian peers have?
Yeah. I feel like at some levels that we sort of look at the situation that you were sort of trying to address in Rome was not necessarily about the core fundamentals, because people there's a denser form of living, and some of the issues, it seems, is sort of as a consequence of that, and other socioeconomic factors that are sort of they're also present in the Thomastown site. Like our site is similarly, sort of a bit on the periphery. It has a much lower socioeconomic profile than the rest of Melbourne, but it's also suburban in its built form, so that there are those lower densities, and it is tougher to have to commute from by a bike or walking to get to services and that sort of thing. I think we both sort of chose the key theme of sort of connection and transportation, because that is such a key way that people interact with their cities, to not just know that there is shops and services nearby, but also to be able to get there in a safe and enjoyable way. I feel like that connection and that theme is sort of consistent with the challenge of addressing the way to improve cities going forward. It's just the context is also a bit different, in that we're sort of trying to deal with the issue of low density. You seem to be dealing with the issue of the consequences of the way that your built form has been made. So I feel like there's a bit of connection and continuity there.
And also probably for you, Will and Luke, I know I could see that Luke was about to talk, but for your context, I think Stefano touched in his presentation, but there is part of Rome, outside of the touristic side of Rome, where the city is grown a bit sporadically. It's just grown ad hoc. So there are planning regulation, but there's a lot of built form that sits outside the planning regulation. So people just build stuff. In Italy, this amazing mechanism. Mauro can. There's still a lot of condoni. It still happens. The condoni. When was the last one? So condono is a mechanism for which, in between them, you just build whatever you like outside of the planning regulation. And then there's this big condono, which means someone says, that's fine, you didn't do it by the rules, but you're going to pay some money and everything will be sorted out. Okay? And
quite so.
What was the last time there was one? I can't remember.
95. 95 se non sbaglio.
About 20 years ago, but the question, but we can't speak about that, is that the majority of the requests for the condono are still on the way, because it's not possible due to environmental issues or landscape issues, and so many people are still in between. But that's quite complicated. Yeah, that's quite complicated. But in the last year, the right side government will make easier to refurbish and to enlarge and to adapt your house, even if it's not totally regular on the. So, but there is also a practical reason, because if an entire settlement with thousands of people live there, the question of how they were built, with or without permission, is an issue. But we have there thousands of people living, and so we have to take care of them. We can't say that to them, okay, it's your problem. It was not regular, and so you have to manage yourself, or go away, or not to make improvement to your house, not to make some intervention on the energy side, or adapt the house. But if I can go back on what your students say to us, it was quite interesting, because they started with the concept of density, and also in Rome we can say that Ponte di Nona has a low density, but in a different way, because we have this sort of huge blocks. In Rome, I don't think that there are any, maybe Olgiata or maybe some little neighborhood with individual dwellings. We live in flats, and the density of this part are very high, but the general density of the neighborhood is very low. So it's quite weird situation, because there is no possibility to increase density of the building part. It's quite difficult, because they are already dense, very dense, and so we can't imagine to rise up the buildings and improve the environment, acting on the built part. And On the contrary, we have a very, very weak public structure. And we have a lot of land without use, without maintenance, without anyone who take care of that. And so it's quite correct what you said, that for us, a 15-minute city means to have another look to linking, to connection, to how it could work. On the opposite, in the outskirts of Melbourne, I see a lot of opportunity to private and public investments to transform the built part of the neighborhoods, and that's very, very interesting for us. I don't know if
there's an issue there. There's an issue there that the built form is and the land is very fragmented.
I was asking the same. Yeah, I was thinking the same. How can you transform a neighborhood where people are still there, are already there? So
yeah, and that's the issues we're facing in Australia to make that change in suburbia, because we have an housing crisis. The houses cost us, the cost of housing is very, very, very high, but the value is not in the house itself. The value is on the land. So what brings the value is the land. And so you have this land that's high value, is highly fragmented. So the real question that Australia is grappling with is, what are the mechanisms to keep all those beautiful things of maintaining the community, the people that have lived there for a long time, but changing the way in which they're living physically in a building, changing the buildings, the build form, to create different opportunity for higher densities. So, and that's what Australia is experimenting with in terms of how do you put the land together. So, how do you make it happen? That's the biggest challenge that Australia is facing now. And then, I don't know. Look, Cal, that's your job. What are your strategies? You're going to go out there very soon and find a solution for all of this. Can we count on you?
Yeah, it's very much an interesting issue in Australia. The issue of private ownership. We've had a sort of economic landscape in Australia for a long time, which is reoriented land as an investment rather than a basic right. And so we've sort of turned housing into something that is sort of the purview or the privilege of the middle class. And so trying to turn it into something that is accessible again to everyone is the challenge, as you said. And I guess trying to create, as we are so capitalist focused, trying to create a system whereby the incentive is there for people to give up that investment and to bring it back into public accessibility is really the challenge. Maybe beyond us at this point in our education.
Yeah, no, but I was just saying this is the biggest challenge you will face when you get out there in really changing. And there's a lot of conversation. Yeah. And there's also an important point, which I think Will has pointed out, that effectively that land was stolen. So you need to reconciliate. What does it mean being on someone else's land? And how you reconciliate that. And hopefully there will be a reform and Indigenous people will have a better say in all of this. That's what we hope it will happen, but that's the direction that the current government is going towards, which is another aspect that it's not comparable to Rome. Yeah.
No, that's very
Rome
nice.
was part of the conquering. The Romans were part of the conquering troop, not the part of the people that were conquered. So, and that was far back in history. So, it's quite a it's going to be quite a challenge for us.
Yeah. Actually, Francesca, it is a long time that we are not conquering anything.
Anything at all.
So we are most dealing with the ruins of the empire, but not that's not. But it's interesting what you said, because you have to deal with the conflict with people, and people coming from abroad have conquered the land. Now we are, if I can say, in the opposite situation. We are here, and there are many people, not so many, but many people that are arriving from abroad. They are not conquering; they are the last in the in the social scale. But they are arriving here, and they try to settle in a place that is not so easy for them. We are quite hostile with people that are coming here, and so there is another kind of conflict between people who live in a place and people who arrive. And that's the city from the start of the humanity. The city is someone who settled in a place and someone who arrived from other place. And they have to stay together. And that's the reason of the city. And so each city has to manage with the conflict from what's happening, what came from outside and what came inside. Another different aspect that I think that could be interesting to point out is that here in Italy, in the last we have 20 or 30 years of very interesting public policy, and that they stopped around 20 and 30 years ago, and now we are all the last generation is trapped into a situation where public policy are weak, or there are no public policy at all. For instance, we don't have any public housing policy since 1998. So it came 25 years, an entire generation of zero, no, any public policy on housing. I hope that your situation is quite different than ours. And I was interested in understanding if it's the local authorities, the national authority, and how they try to make urban policies on housing, also on the urban regeneration, if any. If it's not too an open question too wide.
No. It's the housing models here in Australia is quite different. So Italy went from a very centralized model to a non-existing model. Practically. So when it was deregulated, then it just stopped delivering public housing. In Australia, public housing is still present, not as much as is needed. The public housing has different tiers, so there is different levels. There's public housing, the one that is delivered by the government, but that is for the very you need to be in a very precarious situation to access public housing. So, and the waiting list it's quite long. I haven't looked at recently, but up to 2 years ago, there was up to 6 months waiting list, and we were talking people that are precarious situation, where 6 months could be a very long time. There's been period in which was over a year, that time frame to access public housing, and we're talking people a risk of homelessness. So it's a very precarious situation. So that social housing is also delivered through
housing association. So it's privately delivered and managed, subsidized by the government. And that's community housing. That community housing doesn't look at the very bottom, but it looks at people that need support, and it mostly addresses specific groups that might be from youth at risk to elderly, people with disability and mental health issues. So, and family to a certain degree, but it's not very extensively. And then there's the market of the affordable housing. So there's two concepts. One is housing affordability, so the one that is freely on the market, but cost is less than what is the average on the market. That is what's considered affordable. And part of it, it's delivered, for example, here in Western Australia, is there was a big campaign. It's just finished 2 years ago, and there was a lot of housing that was affordable, delivered by privates and sold at an affordable price, and it was developed on public land. So that was public land that was given. So the private agreed to reduce the margins of the income over their investment. So they had an agreement to have a fixed margin on the money that they could make out of the selling the land, with the clause that it will sell on the market for below the market price. So it was mostly targeting young family, first-home buyers, and as a background information, the housing market in Australia, it's ownership market. The rental market is almost inexistent. So it's very, very small, the rental market. So it's an ownership market. We have these beautiful things that's called the housing continuum. So there is a support for you to move towards ownership. So the government supports people to ownership, and which is what also has created the situation that we are now, that Will was mentioning before, that the ownership of the housing, it's with family. So that fragmentation is owned. So all those houses are owned by family, and that's is the investment. So it's the mom and dad that bought the house for their kids. So that's for themselves and then for the kids. So the investment also is not a, it's not a speculative investment, or at least it wasn't for a long time. It's slightly changing. So that market, housing market, is made of a lot of mom and dad that have put their savings into buying a house. So it's a very risky situation, because when a market like that collapsed, you don't have big investors that are losing money. You've got families, you've got your population that is losing money. It's losing the value. So it's a very precarious situation to be in as a nation.
This is quite different from here. We don't have the same situation, even if we have some similar. It's quite similar on the backing of on pushing people to have their own property for the flat. But we deal in different way with the high and go of the market we faced some market crisis, but there is no. We are not so dependent. We are not so. How can I say in English? If the value of the flat going down, nothing is happening for the family in the short time, and so we can absorb quite easily the movement of the market. Instead, we don't have any public policy, as you mentioned before. And I was wondering, in your Will and Luke, in your master plan, do you imagine that to match some policy, some public policy on the housing, you imagine that will be middle class and or maybe youngster or maybe people coming from abroad that could stay and live in your density, in your they want to feed the density improvement, the density increasing in the suburb.
Well, with our housing typology, one of the ideas we thought of would be intergenerational housing. That is where you would have the parent and the parent would live on the ground floor and their children would live on the upper floors. So
you sure, Luke, that you want to stay with your parents on the ground floor?
Yeah. No, but it's an idea that's been looked at a lot or thought about a lot in literature or talked about in strategy at the moment. But that was an idea we thought about, but we're not sure how feasible it is. But yeah.
My weird question, Luke, was that in Italy, young people can't afford to go out and live independently. And so they want to go out and to escape from family. And here family is always present, but they are obliged, they can't move so easily from their home. And so I was thinking that it's quite interesting that your perspective is the opposite. You want to stay.
It's not so much like young adults. Young adults would probably live on their own. It's more when it's a married couple, and then eventually the parents might move in when they're in older years and live on the property itself. Not so much when you're like a young couple who wants independence itself. If that makes sense.
No, well, I was joking. What you said is it's so interesting because we have to face here in Italy. I think that for the first time we went from a long period, maybe centuries, with family when family were living together, you know, most for 2 or 3 generations, and so they have a sort of social aid within the family. Now it's no more that. We had a lot of old people living alone, and this is quite difficult to ensure a care for those people who are alone in their flats spread in the city with the child and the adult people living in other neighborhoods or in other cities. Yeah, and also with some problems also on the housing markets because they have huge flats and they are alone and they sell property to get the aid for the last year of their lives. And so what you say that if I can figure out is to try to shorten the distance between young people, not of the same family, but between young people, adult people, and older people, not to separate them and try to understand how we can live together and stay closer than we are. And that could be interesting for a new form of living that is not totally separated, totally fragmented and spread around the city. And it could be very, very interesting to understand how and if this model will work in the future.
Because if I can add to what Luke was saying is that, for example, if we look at the neighborhoods that they analyzed in the unit, part of that Thomastown, which was built in the 60s. So Thomastown that area of Melbourne was developed following the building of this industrial area that in the outskirts. So that when it was built, there was nothingness between Melbourne City and Thomastown, 20 kilometers away. So it was, it was just land, and then an industrial area came in the 60s. Those suburban areas were developed. to the point that you can actually find bits of newspaper from the time, and that area was called the New Little Manchester. So there was a lot of English, also a lot of English, and there was a German little town. There was a proper town in itself. It wasn't part of Melbourne in the area. Also, what's happening there is that families from there have grown. So the kids have left and they couldn't find a place in the area. So some of these big houses, similar to the apartments in Italy, are now owned by elderly couple or who have with them the male or female that are left alive. And their kids would like to be close by, but they can't because there's no houses around and they can't afford to move. So that intergenerational model can create opportunity for these people to age in place, because there's not smaller houses to move to if you want to age in place, if you want to stay in the area. There's no smaller place to stay to buy. So that intergenerational housing is an opportunity for them to age in place and for the kids or the new generation to move in. So it also, the neighborhood doesn't die. It doesn't become an old people neighborhood. Some of the models that have actually worked in Australia in that sense, there's been cases where some group of older couples or lone person that are considered elderly, they actually joined forces if they were living next to each other, and they amalgamated the land. They developed slightly higher densities, small apartments on part of this plot, and then developed the rest of the area, the rest of the land, suitable to be sold to maybe younger families. So that's a model for example, for amalgamating land that works in some type of neighborhoods with older generation living in there.
That's interesting.
I wanted to ask something.
Yeah.
This model of ownership and intergeneration ownership, the mom and dad buying the house for their children, how does a population and a model like this respond to a densification, like to the idea of having new people coming in or to selling their lands to build a bigger housing? Are they keen to that kind of change? Because these kind of neighborhoods, I suppose, also built a history and a culture around having always the same generation living in. So are they pretty attached to what they have right now, or are they looking forward to, do they need to be pushed towards a more dense model, or also
it's an entire shift of mentality around living in higher density, which Australia as a whole has to grapple with, that we can't continue living this way. Melbourne and Sydney have much higher densities, so they're a bit in a. Actually, we don't have a presentation. They have better buying into these sort of models, especially from the younger generation. A place like Perth is way more difficult. So don't forget that the majority of the increase in population in Australia comes from migration. So Australia is a country of migrants. So apart from the Aboriginal people, there's no real Australians. And there's the first wave of English migrants that came in, which probably are the one that have been here in this land the longest after the. But it's a young history, so it's not that far away. It's a young history, and so we're talking 150 years, 200 years. We don't reach 200 years of history or white history in Australia, compared to 4,000 or 5,000 of Indigenous history in this country. So it's that needs to be, and that and particularly Perth, that was settled, was a colony, that was a free colony, was the first free colony. So Sydney and Melbourne were built by slaves, so they were boats of slaves brought in and built what is what was the beginning, Perth was a free colony. So it wasn't built by convict. People move here, for example, for lifestyle. So Perth is a city. So Melbourne and Sydney are more cosmopolitan. Will, you're Australian more than me, so correct me if I'm wrong. But Melbourne and Sydney are more cosmopolitan than Perth are. So when people move to Perth, move for lifestyle. The amazing beaches. It's a very slow pace place to live in. So it's very hard for someone that's probably relocated from other side of the globe to convince them, yes, you left your very busy city, you moved here to find your very slow lifestyle, but guess what? We can't afford it anymore. You need to live in an apartment. That would take a long time to change your mentality. So what's happening, that Perth is probably the longest city on this globe.
We stretch at 150 kilometers, and most of it is suburbs filled with English people who've moved across the sun and space. So
so it's a long stretch because Perth is confined geographically by the ocean and what is called the Darling's Cup. There's the desert at the back, so you just, and there's and so it just keeps growing linearly along the coast. And Australian cities are along the coast because environmentally it's the best place to live. The inland is got very harsh conditions, so you live close to the water because inland is mostly desert, at least on the west coast. Yes, so close to water is the best place to be. So you can only imagine, how hard it would be to change that mentality towards higher density. I think we all agree that we should, don't we, Will? We all agree that we should.
Oh, I agree.
But I don't know. But I don't know if deep inside we want.
I think another aspect for that is sort of buy-in. So like the last election cycle, not this current one, but the last one focused a lot on reform of the taxation system for property investors. And in Australia, there's a very significant class of people who own multiple properties, and there's an entrenched sort of mentality that any sort of reforms that might possibly devalue one's property is untenable at all. And so there's sort of this structural almost Ponzi scheme-esque thing where everyone is invested in property, and it results in a never-ending price property spiral, to where we have such an inflated asset market where it's impossible for anyone at the bottom to get any sort of foothold in it. And so that is something also that needs to be contended with, is sort of property rights and community buy-in into that mentality.
Yeah, and I think it's just to give context to what Will was saying, which I think is very right, is also that our economy is not as diversified as economies elsewhere. So we, I use the we, I kind of half, but in Australia, I give the example of Western Australia, particularly Queensland is similar. Melbourne and Sydney are different, but the majority of Australia and Western Australia, it's land-wise quite a very big chunk of Australia as a state. The economy is not as diversified as you will find in Europe. So it relies on mining and natural resources. So that's what Australia exports. That's how Australia, the economy is based on that. There is a big chunk of the economy that is also based on education. So Australia exports education. And so when you have, and then there's the construction industry and the property that kind of links together. So the only leverage that the government has to stimulate the economy, it's in the moment, and the mining as booms and crashes continuously. So what kind of stabilized those continuous boom and crashes is the construction industry. And which it doesn't generate money, but it makes the money circulates, which is we've used the construction industry during COVID, which actually had a very bad impact on our housing market, because it's created a very weird situation where, and that was there's a shortage of construction materials, laborers, and there was no migration, so there was no workforce. So that's and it's happening in Europe. They have invested in construction as well, but there was a lot of other different economies behind that construction. But for us, it wasn't. So it's a very delicate spot for Australia, all that revolves around investment in properties and housing specifically. So it's quite interesting, but it's completely different from Europe. Yeah. Sorry, Mauro, we just took over. Me and Will took over the conversation.
No, we are totally absorbed by your conversation because it's so interesting for us. This is and if I can say, I have to appreciate you. Will, how old are you?
I'm young. Many years young. And
I'm
Will is many years young. We're the same age, Will? Can I claim
sure.
it?
Yeah,
Sure.
we'll go
Can I
with that.
claim it?
You
No.
two students, Francesca and Will, are very smart.
Yeah.
It's a
But
pleasure
also there's
to listen to
yeah,
you.
that's good. That's a compliment for you. If also the planning system is different here. So the planning system is it's a bit different. It's based on the English model. So there's a bit of difference between architects and planners, and so planners is a pure profession detached from architecture.
Okay. That's a good question. If you are interested in how can we describe the planning system in Italy? Totally.
Can you describe to Will? I've tried to describe to them. I don't know. Can you do it for me? I don't know. Mauro, maybe you're the right person. Maybe your students are the right person. I don't know.
That's interesting. We had an interesting planning system for a two generation after the Second World War, if I can say. We totally renew our legislation. We had a lot of urban plan, we have housing plan, and then landscape plan. We have a long period, a long season with some interesting regulating and also way of planning in Italy. Then something happened. I think that it's the fault of Margaret Thatcher, but I don't know if I can say it's all on her and on the new liberalism, if I can say so, and the way we here in Europe we look at things, trying to stop to regulate, stop planning, and try to make things happening in different ways. But actually, for sure, our planning system now is broken. Is broken as well as our neighborhoods. We are. It's not in many parts of Italy. It's not implemented at all. Just some few regions are a planning system that works, and local administration. The other thing that I have to say that here in Italy there is formally we have different levels of planning, regional, county, and city. But just the last one, planning in Italy is made at almost at the city level, and we don't have any strong planning system at metropolitan or regional and any at all at national level. We have, and what else can I say? And in the last years, we have a sort of detachment from planning system and the reality, and now we have to face an important issue, if I can say. Our planning system was oriented to address the expansion of the city, to address the growth. And now, in a sort or another way, we can say that the growth has finished. It's not true, but it's almost true. we don't have to face in any part of Italy new urban expansions as we faced 20 years ago or 40 years ago. It's not the question. The question is how we can manage the living city, the existing city. And that's totally different. You told us when property are subdivided, when there is the local condition of property, of private properties, of public properties, the people who live in the city, the huge number of institutions and organizations, they make their own plan, make more difficult to intervene in the existing cities that imagine the new city. And that's the struggle that we have to face in this period.
So maybe we need more planners. So we need this next generation of
Absolutely.
architectural bachelor graduate to get into planning.
We need planners. Absolutely, we need planners. We need planners, but we don't need to make the same plans that we have made 20 years ago. And that's the question. And we need planners, and also we have to understand how to reconnect planning and our local administration and politicians, because they try to solve their problem without planning. They say that they have no time. They are always in a sort of emergency condition, and we have a recovery plan. We don't have a program. We have to decide. Oh, it's time. It's 12 o'clock. We have to decide. We have 3 minutes to decide what's happening in the following 3 years. We don't have time to make plans. Plans are something somewhere
removed.
Somewhere else. Yeah. We have
Maybe we need to send you some of our planners. And we were talking this morning. We'll want to come to where they want to come. And maybe we send some of our planners down. Some Australian planners.
I'd have to learn the language first, probably.
Yeah. I think you can make the Italians are very. I think you can make the but the Australian system is it's statutory based, while the Italian system has always been built form based and strategic. So we're actually trying to learn from models that looked at the built form and the strategic slowly. So to kind of mediate and find a model in between. Maybe we should help each other.
Yeah,
to find that in between model. To find that in
why
between.
not? We have to experiment something new. I totally believe it.
Yes. So you should come. You should visit, and we have a nice conversation. Okay.
I try to convince some students that they don't want to go out of Rome. They're keen to stay here. This is the best
they don't want
place
to
in the
come to start. Yeah, said.
No.
Yeah, we said we're working. If you want to come in January, we're working to make it happen. So if you're going to come in January, and January is the best time. We'll sell the January Cottesloe Beach afternoon.
Oh, it's lovely. You get some fish and chips, and you watch the sunset, and you hear the seagulls, and
the seagulls will get you chips.
White sand.
Makes the difference.
And the afternoon is the best because you get the frio doctors in, which is the wind from the ocean, so it cools down the hot day. Are we selling the full picture, Will?
Yeah. Francesca, what do you think? We can come in Perth in the afternoon and then come back.
It is the afternoon.
Yeah, you are in the afternoon.
Oh yes, it's almost 5 o'clock for us. You can come. It's winter now, so it's outside is 18 degrees because it's winter. So, but summer is nicer. So this is my winter. It's full winter here. So. No, but if you come in January, it will be summer.
Okay. We hope for January.
Yeah, January is a much better time.
No, we hope. We work to be here, to be there in January.
Yeah, and we can show you some suburban context the next time we come over.
and you can. I know I grew up in the Roman periphery, so you don't have to show me, but you can show.
No,
You
yes,
can be the
we
guide for
can-
the students. You can.
You can go in another place, not Roma Est.
We have many.
No, Roma Est. No, Roma Est.
No, but there is something interesting also in Roma Ovest and Roma Nord. Okay.
No, thank you very much. Actually, I got an email from Giles. That he said thank you, and he was sorry that he had to go quickly. Because he had another meeting. But where it is, he actually wrote something. What it is? I've missed it. I'm gonna forward that to you. I can't find it right now. Oh, here it is. He said that he was sorry that to go quickly because he had a staff meeting, but he was commenting on your presentation, Stefano. Said it was very good. And he really liked your contextual map. And he was glad to see that someone presented the outskirt of the city or Rome instead of the usual tourist eternal city view. And also the fact that you actually use socioeconomic factors and a Gini coefficient. That was great to see because we don't use that in Australia. No one, I don't think our students even know what it is. And I really like the idea that focusing on activating public space and public realm to kind of link together all the bits of the city. And I really loved your area photo. I thought it was very communicative of your idea. And your approach to the concept or tailoring the 15 minutes concept to the context. That's what he said. So well done. That was Charles.
Oh, it's very, very kind from him. And if you talk to him, thanks him a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we could be proficient in some way, we can share the presentation. I would like very, very much to have the presentation of your students. It's so interesting also for my following course, just to show how you address your students.
Yeah, you need to ask permission to Will. I can't share it without Will's permission. So if Will, and I will ask to look.
By all means.
Yeah. So yeah. So okay. So I will share it with you so you can. But Giles also said that he really liked the idea of having this shared platform. So given the timing, this time he couldn't get the Swedish students to connect. But if we plan it a bit more in advance, then we can make it happen within the 3 institutions here, you and Sweden. So that was the feedback. So even outside the, the platform of the Biennale. So that was fun. Yeah.
I try to bring the students with me also in the following weeks and try to engage them.
Yeah, and bring them to do some urban planning. It's not cheap there. I know that being an architect, it's nice, it's fancy, but it just planning is good.
No.
I think the planning community is way more welcoming than the architectural community. In the sense, it's more oriented towards working together. The architects tends to be a lot of self-centered over finding, shared solutions. So we want more planners.
But we are committed in changing architects.
To be more.
In Roma 3, we are influencing them so much. We are few, but they listen to us. And so they are interesting architects here in Roma 3 because they are not, they are quite special. And they look at the urban scale. It's interesting. I have to make some advertisement.
I'm a special architect from Roma 3.
If you want to send us some students in Roma 3, they will find this interesting connection between architecture and planning.
Yeah, we're still in Australia. We're still very much separate. What do you think, Will? I think there's a bit of a
bit of contamination happening more recently, but it's still very much two different course of studies. We do see more architects coming and doing our classes. What do you have a lot of interaction with your architectural peers, Will? I don't know.
Not until this class, honestly.
Okay.
Shu and our
That's
group.
good. That's good to know.
Yeah. I got to work with an architect and be thoroughly blown out of the water by their graphic skills. That's something that I sort of lack a lot. So yeah, we don't really get to sort of rub shoulders very much, but some of these units where we cross pollinate, it's very great. I think it's good.
Yeah, we need to have more of those. Anyway, thank you very much for the opportunity, for creating this opportunity, Mauro. Yeah.
Thank you to you, Francesca.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm here.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
We're gonna see you sometime soon. Okay. On this other side of the globe.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe.
Yes,
okay.
Maybe. Let's continue the conversation.
Yeah. Hopefully. Thank you very much. You have to leave the classroom. People are around for the next event of the Great Biennale.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Ciao.